I'm Amy Pruitt.
I'm Lisa Dumas.
I teach Ayurveda and yoga.
I teach yoga. I'm a yoga therapist in training, and I offer transformational coaching. But that's just part of the story.
We're moms, daughters, wives, and friends. We're always learning, and we've both experienced healing by what we teach.
And the intention of this podcast is to offer you our favorite tools from the traditions and sciences that support us as we navigate the realities and stressors of modern life.
Each week, we'll share stories, answer your questions, and talk to others who inspire us.
Welcome to the Radiant Warrior Podcast.
Yoga and Ayurveda to reclaim a courageous heart.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Lisa.
I'm so very excited about our conversation today and our wonderful guest. I've been thinking about this all week.
I know, me too. I've been thinking about it, and so many things are coming up that are surprising.
Okay, so let's share with our listeners why we're having the conversation that we're about to have. A few episodes ago, we invited a really special guest to our program, one of the top pro snowboarders in the world turned illustrious yoga teacher and yoga professional, Katie Brower, and we had such a wonderful conversation with her. And then she so very generously invited you and I to speak on her upcoming, which is I think her second annual Yoga Professional Summit. And so this is like a big online summit of leaders and teachers and thought leaders who speak and are interviewed by her to share their wisdom and knowledge with others. And you and I have signed up for many online summits throughout the years, and I know we've both learned a lot from them. And when she invited us to this summit, which is coming up on February 18th, so we'll revisit that and make sure everybody signs up to watch. You and I were, of course, excited.
Totally.
And very honored and very grateful. And then other more uncomfortable emotions rose. So
yes,
why don't you speak to, your process and what came up for you during that couple of weeks, and then I will do the same.
So having Katie on the podcast, first of all, was just absolutely a dream. She's an amazing speaker and professional and just somebody that I really admire and emulate. And so just being able to speak to her on the podcast was awesome. And then she so graciously extended this invitation to you and I separately. So not even as a pair, we would each speak to our own strengths and offerings, and which I was just absolutely blown away and super excited and very grateful. And then I wanted to go get in my closet and shut the door and hide under a big pile of laundry because, oh my God, then I would be on Katie Brower's summit. That I started to freak out. And she's an impeccable professional. And I began to receive some correspondence with her about the summit. And I was trying to be very diligent about sending everything back and being very professional myself and looking for a headshot that I wouldn't cringe when she posted it. And then I didn't hear anything for a long time. And I was like, well, okay, maybe she's busy. And then I spoke with you and you said so excitedly, well, I just recorded my thing with Katie today and it went great. And you were saying what a great experience it was. And you were like, when are you doing yours? And I was like, oh, well, she never got back with me. So maybe, of course, she doesn't want me. And that was my go-to.
I know.
My go-to idea was, because I then didn't hear from her anymore, of course, I thought she had changed her mind and she had found out really that I wasn't summit worthy and, just not, I wasn't good enough. And that was obviously the answer to why I had not heard back from Katie. And so I felt a little sorry for myself. And then just like was it that day or the next day you received an email from her that said that she was having difficulty getting in touch with me? And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, maybe she does want me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it had turned out that her emails had been going to my spam folder in my
Mm-hmm.
email. And of course, instead of first looking there,
Mm-hmm.
I immediately came to the conclusion that she didn't want me, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy, and that, of course, she had changed her mind and just kind of, decided that she didn't want me on there. Instead of there being any other possible reason why I hadn't heard from her in the universe, like
Mm-hmm.
technology or email spam folders or all those things. So it was just that revisiting that pattern or idea. My first go-to idea is, oh, but they wouldn't want me,
Mm-hmm.
or oh, I'm not good enough for that,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm sure they want somebody else. And that's such a ingrained knee-jerk reaction that for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, but it was so interesting that it once again played out in this world where I thought I had worked on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I had worked on this, and that doesn't need to be my first response, but yet here it is again showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, the opportunity really triggered our own special brands of not being good enough. And as I'm listening to you, and I'm sure as others are listening to you, what do we immediately go to if we don't hear back when we send somebody a text or an email? Like one of the thoughts that we go to is, oh, have I somehow done something wrong? We do make it about ourselves and the fact that we are somehow bad in some way. And so I think a lot of people can relate with what you're talking about. And thank you for sharing that that is what came up for you. Yes, we definitely were dealing with this whole spectrum of not being good enough within this process, mixed with our excitement and mixed with our gratitude. Um, for me, yes, there was that initial excitement. And you and I reached out to one another, just very grateful for the opportunity to share. And then I did go into like my familiar one is just not performing well enough, like not being able to step up to the task, somehow not being able to meet expectations. And I'm not even sure what those expectations are. Like what I have come present to that's deeply ingrained in me is just kind of um, doing well, whatever that means, because that was when I received, attention and love at one point in time. And, I would just love to let that story go. And maybe after this discussion with our wonderful guest, who is such a knowledgeable psychotherapist, I will just finally let this story go after sharing it. But then for me, Katie and I did the interview. And a few things happened at the beginning of the interview where the Wi-Fi wasn't strong enough and I had to move my computer around. And I had kind of gotten everything in the way that made me feel comfortable in preparation for the interview so that I could offer from like an authentic place, so that I could offer in a way that would be most helpful. But then all of these unexpected technological issues came up and that threw me. And I could tell as she was interviewing me and we were having our discussion, you are right. She is an impeccable professional. And while it was a wonderful conversation, I had that sense that I was just a little bit outside of myself. And I could feel a sense of being self conscious in my body. And it was one of my teachers, Rod Stryker, who taught me this lesson that I'll never forget, that in the moments when we're feeling self-conscious, that's when we are not connected to self, because our true self cannot be sort of, conscious of itself or embarrassed or feeling not worthy. If we're feeling somehow not worthy or not good, then that is a clue that we are disconnected from true nature. So I had that sense and I felt distracted by attempting to draw myself back into more of an authentic place. Like I could feel myself trying. We've talked about this on the show before. And when I feel myself trying, I know that I am trying to live up to some like impossible to reach ideal that is just somewhere in my psyche. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. So we did that first conversation. And I mean, I was proud of myself for doing it because I was nervous. And anytime I get to the end of something that I'm nervous about, but I do it anyway, I just feel like we all get a little bit stronger in this moment, those moments. So I was proud of myself, but I had this sort of lingering feeling like I just wasn't like in me, you know,
Mhm.
in that in my power. Like I was trying. So I was a little bit aside from that. And so I emailed her and I said, you know, I feel so grateful. I know the conversation was had a lot of beauty in it. However, I have that sort of day after feeling and I wish I had another opportunity. And she was so generous once again, made it so easy for me because she's been interviewed many times in her career. And there has actually been a time where she asked for a re record and she was open about that with me. And she was vulnerable in that way. So it gave me permission to ask for another record. And we did. And I was happy that I did because even asking to do it again felt uncomfortable because I felt like I was letting her down, like I wasn't being a pro, like I was taking up more of her precious time, which again comes from that one down place, right? Of just not living up to these perceived expectations that I have of myself and I think other people have of me too. So the moral of the story is I'm glad that I asked for a re record because I felt so much better and I needed that practice run and I did. And that's just what I needed and that's okay. And I did feel more connected so that ultimately the goal was, you know, I could share from a place of hopefully being useful. So happy endings both, but it definitely brought up, as you say, these stories that, gosh, me too. Like I thought that I had worked through that.
Hmm. Yeah.
So to help us work through this um, is a wonderful friend of both of ours. She is an embodied psychotherapy and she leads these incredible transformational group experiences for women as part of a modality that she created called Gather Her, where women come together and remember who they are under her wonderful, compassionate, kind, wise guidance. It is Jodi Krahn. Welcome back, Jodi.
Hi,
Hi,
good to
Jodi.
be here. Hi, Amy, and Lisa.
So, you've been listening to us share what triggered our own special brands of not being enough. Can you shed some light for all of us on what exactly is being triggered when we want to run and hide in the face of opportunity?
Okay, well, first, yes, I would like to just say to both of you, just listening into your conversation. Uh, yeah, I just love both of you, and I love that you can just have such honest conversations with each other because I feel like for all of your listeners listening in on this conversation, we're all just kind of like, oh, me too. And gosh, we're all just so human here, having these feelings that we don't always feel like we can tell anyone or we don't want to admit because we're embarrassed. And so I just want to acknowledge that just having the conversation that you're having together to me is already part of the antidote or the medicine, which is that you're connecting with each other on an authentic level. And I can hear the compassion in both of your voices as you're hearing the other person and recognizing like, yeah, I feel that way too. Why do we go there? It's so silly. So that's the first thing I want to say is that, you know, beautiful. And I hope we can just keep having these conversations together to normalize this and connect with each other on that deeper level so that we can, hopefully then, as you said, Lisa, connect back to ourselves with that same compassion. So that's the first thing I want to say. But to be more to your point, Lisa, to answer your question, there's different approaches you could take here, but really what's coming to me as I hear both of you speak, because I know you both as very mature women who've worked on yourselves and, just have so much love for each other and for your families and your work. So when I hear your specific stories, I can't help but think these are younger parts of yourselves. These, you can tell me if that feels true or not, but I think what I would invite both of you to do is kind of go back to those places where you both shared those feelings of like, oh yeah, I knew it, I'm not summit worthy, or or whatever it was that was coming up for you. If you can go back to that moment, I'm curious, if you could feel into maybe how old you felt in that moment, if you were being really honest, and see if you can even identify the age, because my hunch here is that these are probably younger parts of yourself that are being activated in these moments.
I totally can feel that, and I can even identify like my age when I started to feel this way. I was 14 when I started to feel this shift of not being okay. Like before, I thought I was okay. Like I thought I was like everyone else. I was just happy-go-lucky kid. Somewhere around 13 or 14, it was that transition to high school. I tried out for cheerleading. In junior high, I was a cheerleader, and I went to a Montessori school, so it was very small. And like every girl in the junior high was on the cheerleading squad because we didn't have, that's how many girls we had. So everyone made the squad. So then when I went to high school, I thought, oh, I'll try out for cheerleading. I'm a cheerleader. I could be a cheerleader. And it was so like rigged. Like, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that going into this new school, and it was a much bigger school that was fed by multiple junior highs. And I was super excited, and in my mind, like I was going to make cheerleading. Like I just knew it. I tried out. I thought I did pretty good. But as I was like watching the tryouts go on and on and on, I could see the big sisters of the girls that were trying out in my grade. I started to get this idea like, oh, like they have something I don't have, whether they have an in or they've been coached or they know people or they knew what to wear. I just showed up as myself, uninitiated, and tried out. And then I went home and they were going to call you if you made the squad. The phone was going to ring. So I just remember that feeling in my body, like waiting all day, like for the phone to ring, and like every second waiting and waiting and waiting. And of course, you can imagine how the story ends. I didn't make the squad. And just this feeling like of washing over me of like, I'm not the same as them, or I'm different than them, or I'm not enough. Like there became this real shift in my mind of like, those girls were better than me and they were good enough and I wasn't good enough. That was a very strong story for me throughout my high school years, as I'm sure like any girl could relate to in high school. High school's brutal. The emotional roller coaster of that day and how that began to narrate this story of not being good enough in that environment.
So Lisa, I don't know if you want to go ahead and share, what that younger piece of yourself, or if you want me just to work a little bit with Aimee here.
Why don't you respond to that first? And then, I was very surprised when you said to go back, what vision came to me of a time in my life. And it was pretty much the same age as Aimee. So please speak to Aimee and then, I'll get my turn on the couch.
Okay. Well, I'm sure for anybody listening to this, yes, if you went to junior high or high school, these events are pretty common, whether it was cheerleading or math club or whatever. We do live in a culture that is set up in this way for competition, and that just lends itself to comparison. Aimee, you're really honest, and you're sharing there that little 14-year-old comparing herself to these big sisters and making meaning of this event. Would this mean if I don't get accepted? I heard you do something that is also pretty human, but I do want to point it out because that's why you asked me to come on today. You mentioned you said something like you had this feeling of just unworthiness, or this feeling washed over your body, when the phone didn't ring. And I hear that, and I think we can all relate to that. But what I want to point out is just the importance of understanding that originated with a thought. In this case, this is true because, of course, as women, it's really important that we trust our feelings and listen to our feelings. But it's also important to identify where the feeling might be coming from, which in this case is a story that the 14-year-old girl had about what it would mean if she made the squad and what it would mean if she didn't make the squad, which, sounds like the meaning she made was, I'm not as good as these other girls, fill in the blanks, right? We would all, and then that created this body feeling. We know that our body is listening to our brain, where all our cells are listening, and then the body, it holds this as a memory. Moving forward in life, other things happen as we get older and even though we mature and we sort of know better in our minds, there can be this real body memory of shame and not making the cut. So coming back to this idea of working with maybe a younger part in ourselves, I'm borrowing here from a beautiful modality called internal family systems that Richard Schwartz kind of formed from being a family systems therapist. And he discovered that, these roles and parts in family systems, actually, we all have them inside of us. This is really useful, I think, especially as adults, to recognize we have younger parts in us, meaning these events that happen to us as little people, as teenagers, where we, made these stories in our minds about the meaning, or somebody, said something really hurtful or did something to us or ignored us or whatever. These younger parts of us, they're wounded. They didn't get what they needed. And so it's almost like they stay in there because they're not healed. So they can't fully integrate into our growing, maturing adult self. I'm actually curious, Aimee, as you remember this day, this event of cheerleading, and you connect with that 14-year-old, as you were talking about her, what did that feel like for you?
I have so much empathy for her. I think it set me on a different path in high school than I would have had. And it changed a lot for me. It changed what I thought, and not just becoming a cheerleader, but where I belonged in the system. And then really having to kind of recreate myself at such a young, like, immature age. That takes a lot of tools that I don't think I had. When I look back, oh my God, I just want to, like, wrap her up and just love her and tell her that she is good enough and that she is worthy and okay. Like, I didn't feel okay.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like I was okay or normal or that I belonged. And not just because, like, I didn't make cheerleading, but because I didn't belong to really any kind of group in high school. And so I really started to identify in high school with the misfits and was proud of that. We kind of became this band of merry misfits. I have a lot of fond memories about them and that time of my life. But it was a definite shift of who I thought I was, who I thought I was going to be. And then kind of in this uncharted, turbulent water of trying to find an anchor somewhere that I could hang on to. It was hard. That was really hard.
Yeah.
That
Well,
sucked.
yeah, it does. And we need to remember this when we're interacting with teenagers. It's not really that much different. It's still it's a bridge that has to be crossed from childhood to adulthood that can be very challenging. But just, I'm wondering if you're noticing, and if for those of you who are listening can notice where Aimee's going. So when she connected, Aimee, when you connected to that empathy, I could sort of feel that, I think we all could just, hand on the heart, like, oh, sweetie, that little 14-year-old that started to pick up all these beliefs about herself. But as you followed that, can you see how that took you, that empathy for yourself kind of took you into remembering some of the other sides of that, connecting with these misfits, and kind of almost brings you back online. It brings you back into connection with yourself, feeling this empathy for the 14-year-old, which then, because you're a grown up now, you can look back with this perspective, like, yes, I see how this was so hard for her, but I also see how she began to recreate herself and connect with these misfits. And I'm sure if you've kept following that thread, that probably has a lot to do with the work that you're doing now and the way that you parent your own children and the kind of friend you are.
I can totally feel all of that. Being 14, I couldn't see it with perspective, obviously, because I was in it. But definitely looking back, I can watch the trajectory of my life and see how all of these events have shaped my life, and, like you said, the work I do and the way I interact with people. And and definitely still, when you said you carry that part of you, oh my God, like I mean, she's right up there, right front and center, like, okay, you're okay, like, you belong, you're good enough, you're strong. And so, yeah, I feel that it's very palpable for me.
Beautiful. And you had a happy ending to this story, but I would say that yes, probably until that 14-year-old is healed and knows it's safe to come home to you, you may have another opportunity to do some of this work. Let's say that that you hadn't been contacted and you weren't going to be in the summit. If we were talking then, what I would have you do is just, to continue to sit there with your hand on your heart and continue to connect with her. Take that time to really listen to her. You were kind of going there a little bit, but, really making a space where the 14-year-old could have a voice, where, she could share more of what these deeper beliefs that turned into, really uncomfortable feelings for her. And, but ultimately, and referring back to internal family systems, it's really this beautiful idea that we, ourself, capital S, becomes the leader of these parts. And the way I like to look at it is that this is really about remothering. My healthy self can now take the 14-year-old and, just like you said, wrap her up in a blanket of empathy and hold her in my arms and tell her the things that she needs to know, mainly that she can trust me now, that in my adult self, I'm not going to put myself maybe in situations where I'm that aren't safe, or where there's a lot of comparison and competition, and so it's this idea that these younger parts will begin to trust us, that we are no longer going to exile them or push them away or be embarrassed of them, but we're actually going to, listen to them. And then these circumstances, like not getting chosen or whatever it is, we start seeing them as gifts, because they give us that opportunity to notice that there's still places in us that need attention.
Yeah, it was very surprising to me that was my first thought when I wasn't hearing back from Katie, like, oh, she doesn't, like, I haven't felt like that in a long time. And then it was back, this feeling of not being good enough. And and it felt familiar. it felt like, oh, I thought we had worked on this. But yet here it is again. And I found it very interesting. Not to say it didn't, I wasn't in the muck and the mire of believing it, because I was believing all the things. To think like I'm almost 50 and I'm still feeling this thing come back up again was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a life journey. These things we work on, that's why I like to see life in a spiral where, we come around again and we come around again. But in a spiral, you're always in a different place. You're moving and you're growing, but just acknowledging how complex we are. And, there are many, many layers. And I think as we become more stable and secure in our lives, these parts and pieces of us feel safer to come up for recognition and ultimately for healing.
So I have something to look forward to again, I guess.
Yes, you do. I think that's a Byron Katieism too, where we can get to the point where we can actually say, I look forward to the next time I'm rejected, so that I can continue to find those places in myself that need attention.
I got so much from listening to both of you. Aimee, I hadn't heard that story before. Thank you for sharing. And Jodi, so much good stuff, so many wonderful ideas for practical, accessible ways that we can turn to ourselves when we get hit by our own brand of not good enough. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So what about you, Lisa?
Yeah, when you asked to, touch into what you were reminded of, I was, again, really surprised with what came up, what scene came up. Same age as Aimee, like the 12, 13 age range. And when I was younger, so in my childhood, I got a lot, when I got loved and appreciated, to me, was when I was excelling at sports. Yeah, specifically sports. And figure skating and baseball were the two things that I was introduced to, that I took to, and that there was family engagement in my performance in those two sports. And then as I grew up, this idea that I was just so naturally good, specifically at being a catcher and being a heavy hitter on the baseball field. So those two things, my talent as a catcher and being able to just take a big swing and hit home runs, those were very tied to receiving love. At other times, it's my memory that I really didn't, in fact, kind of opposite. And then came a time where I wasn't hitting the ball anymore. I remember feeling just so incredibly unworthy that I just couldn't seem to hit the ball. Of course, now I look back and I see how tied my worth was to how I was performing. And then I couldn't catch the ball as well. And our team was in this big competition, in these big finals. It was this big final tournament. And I was replaced as the catcher for the final game. And we were playing the other best team in our division. So I had to go out and play center field, which was not my position. And it's kind of like a movie to me now, where it's the last inning and the bases are loaded and we're up by 1 point, but it's their at bat and I'm out in center field and their heavy hitter, who doesn't seem to miss a pitch, is on base. And I had previously missed a grounder that came out to me that allowed this other team to have bases loaded. And the response from the parent section was visceral. They're yelling at me and yelling at the parent who was coaching to take me out. And I just remember standing out there in the middle of the field, like just wanting to disappear into the grass. because I had failed in such a complete way. Like my whole body right now is feeling just like it felt then, like totally trembly. I could not have felt worse. I just wanted to die. I wanted to hide. I didn't want to be there anymore, anywhere but there, as these parents are shouting and their heavy hitter is up there, and she's pointing out to me. So she's going to hit out to me because I'm the one that's not catching the balls now. And so last at bats, hit comes right to me. And I do catch it. And I just fell to the ground and started like bawling, which really, as this belief of mine ended up creating panic attacks, like that really felt like the first one. You know, there was just so much panic. My adrenaline was so up. I was just fully in fight or flight. Somehow managed to catch that ball, fell on the floor. I just fell on the ground, just in tears, but got so much, of course, positive feedback when I did catch the ball. Like it was one of those hero moments. However, what I had internalized is how, when I didn't catch the ball, how much visceral anger came my way at my very worth, that I had to be taken out. And so I know how much I internalize that doing well equates being seen and being loved and being safe and comfortable. And then not doing well is very unsafe. And that is played out over and over again when I have perceived myself making mistakes in my work or in my relationships or saying the wrong thing. I just immediately want to be swallowed up by the earth, never to have been seen again. And I have lots of memories like that. So yeah, when I didn't feel that I did well in my first interview, I could feel that it wasn't like it used to be, but I could feel that I had let her down.
Yeah.
And that I was trying to be good. Like, and so I was proud of myself for asking to do it again and for doing it again. That felt like my big victory, to not just hide and then like never listen and just pretend that I was never asked, because I hid from a lot of opportunities, which is one of the things that I talk about in that interview. I do talk about how this wanting so badly to be good all of the time and never being able to live up to how good I thought I needed to be. Like, no one can hit a fucking home run every day. But just wanting to be that good, like that shredded my nervous system. And that is what I believe disordered anxiety for me and regular panic attacks was all about. It was just exhausting to try to live up to that and never having the feedback that I didn't have to. Like, I don't remember anyone ever saying I didn't have to live up to that. And in fact, then I went into radio where you're being, your program director is telling you all the ways in which you suck and all the things that you need to do to be better. So I just feel like I've been confronting this wanting to please and wanting to be good and wanting to perform at this high level over and over again, and realizing that, I just can't. But just like Aimee said, and you said to her, I can recognize that that's never going to completely go away. Like, I am still faced with it every day. And so, you've already shared with Aimee the practices that I can do. And I feel now that I've really isolated like that moment where I felt it the most.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I can see myself in my uniform. I think I even have a picture of myself from that day.
I feel like we're all standing on that field right now, Lisa. It's quite a visual for me. And so actually I do have a few things I would like to offer here, but could you just put your hand on your heart and just go, maybe just go stand with that little girl who just wants to be swallowed up by the earth. I mean, you've done this before, but I'm just going to invite you just in this moment. If you could just go put your arms around her and maybe even today tell her what it is she really needed to hear then.
Yeah, I'm going to have to spend some time with her.
I think we're all, that was quite a story, Lisa. And that I think I can certainly feel that in my body. And yes, we've all had those moments of this visceral shame of people's anger coming at us, and that feeling of being a disappointment, and goodness, the pressure that you must have felt, in that, like you said, it's like a movie moment. And a couple of things I'd like to put out here in how we come to these places of empathy for ourselves is, first, let's acknowledge these systems that we all grew up in that would put a child in this position. And I did my share in the hockey rink as a hockey mom, and with horror I would listen to these parents and their own unhealed parts coming up, and then projecting that out onto their children who are we're not in the Olympics here, these are children, and the pressure that we can impose on them to perform and to get it right and to do it for the team, and whatever, or cheerleading would be another example of that. It's really recognizing these systems that we've all grown up in that are systemically rooted in the patriarchal ideas around competition and one-upping and having to be perfect. I mean, we could have a whole podcast on this, what this has done to men and women, but we're three women talking here specifically around, how the messages women carry around having to do it all, being athletic, being sexy, being smart, being feminine, being this, being that, plus earning an equal wage and doing everything that men are doing. It's so much. And it starts as little girls. I don't think we should be putting children in these situations, because your stories are just perfect examples of how it sets them up for these belief systems, which become unconscious programs running, and they just show up like feeling like I didn't get it right, feeling like I'm not enough, feeling like I don't belong. Those are actually stories, thoughts, that they go unconscious, and then we just walk around having all these feelings, and then we have to manage that. And then here comes addictions and compulsions and all the things.
Yeah, we've been there, Aimee.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Can I just take a moment and say that I've been over here bawling, like, listening to your story was
yeah, I was a little surprised at how I felt too, and it also brought up, like, thinking about my own daughter.
It was like watching a movie and feeling all those feelings, and having my experience and having your experience, and we were all on that field with you. Like, listening to your story was amazing to hear you be able to take us there and walk us through it and identify where things began for you. Like, that was so powerful.
Yeah.
I was surprised how much I still felt it, and I wanted to ask about that. Like, when you have a client in the room and you can see, like, if you saw me, I'm a little sweaty right now.
Yeah, well, I can feel it.
And a little shaky and cold, like, this is a familiar feeling for me. So that's clearly still here, like, in a big way. It's in my body in a big way. Like, what do we do with that when we just so feel it?
Well, actually, this is the good segue into explaining maybe a little bit more into internal family systems, because you kind of did it there. You gave us a good example. So a younger part came up. We all could, connect with her. You were feeling it. then there's another part of you that came online because we're making a podcast here and you're running an interview, and it's like, gosh, I've got this little girl in the field. And so, this other part of you comes in. This is a much more sophisticated part that's like needing to manage this situation, right? You're interviewing me, and this is not a bad part. This is a beautiful part that helps you function in your life. But in this particular modality, the languaging that he gives around it is that we have these exile parts. He calls them the exiles. So we could say maybe that little girl on the field has been an exile. And really all that means is that maybe you pushed her away, or you maybe felt like you've done some work around it. So, she might be down there somewhere, but sometimes it's because it's embarrassing. These parts come up and we feel so insecure and needy. And so we tend to sort of push them down. And then these sort of next level of parts that appear in us, they're usually a little bit older and more sophisticated. He calls them the managers. Mm-hmm. And the manager kind of comes in and tries to protect the exile. And I just want to acknowledge, like, you're doing this work in front of an audience. So of course, this could get a little blurry, but anyway, this is just something to think about, that we need to actually work with the manager part, because it's actually that manager part that maybe doesn't trust us. And that's why it thinks it needs to come in and manage the situation. And then just to kind of just share his whole, well, I'm not sharing his whole theory. I would, encourage anyone to put his name into a YouTube search. He's quite generous with what he shares, but he, then there's this next layer of parts he calls firefighters. And those are the parts of us. And I know the three of us are very familiar with our own firefighters that will come online and say, okay, I'm going to drink the whole case of beer now, or I'm going to eat that entire bucket of ice cream. So in other words, when the exile kind of kicks up and then the manager comes in and tries to manage, and now there's just a lot going on in our system, lots of feelings and swirliness, the firefighter might just come in with the fire hose and say, all right, I'm going to put this fire out. And that we might do, well, there's many ways we can do it, with alcohol, with food, with shopping, with, some way of either distracting or, putting out those flames. So, and so Lisa, your question is, what would I do if you were a client, is really just what I did. Like, even though it seemed like we needed to move on, it felt really important to just actually stay with that little girl that showed up today. And I would just, I like to have people put their hands on their heart, because it's such a self-nurturing, tender way of being, and just really, in our imagination, go to that little part, or invite that little part to come to us, and just speak to it as you would a child. I see you. I hear you. Oh my goodness. You feel so much right now. You feel all this anger, people's anger coming at you. You just want that grass to swallow you up, right? We just reflect back to that part, what we see and what we hear. And then, again, like a kind parent, we, as you would your own child or your own best friend, or, we just start to comfort and to speak to this little part, or to the manager, of our, like, hey, look, I'm an adult now, and I'm never going to let you be in a situation like that. You can trust me. I've got this, and I love you. Come close.
What I get from this conversation too is there's many times that I feel the feeling that I had in my body, to a degree. Like, if somebody that I really admire comes to one of my classes, or if I'm asked to do a workshop at a festival or something, I will have sort of an echo of how that feels in my body. And so from now on, what I'm going to take from this is that's going to be a clue that she's with me, and that it's her. Of course, she's reminded of that moment, that if she doesn't step up and catch that ball, something terrible is going to happen. And so what is something that I could specifically say, because she's not always going to catch the ball.
Right. And I think you might have just answered it, because the belief is, her belief is that if I don't catch that ball, something terrible will happen. If I don't get a phone call from the cheer squad, this means I'm bad or unworthy or whatever, right? Whatever it is that this younger part is believing, that's, I think, what we want to say. You know what? We're okay. You're safe. Nothing bad is going to happen. Mm. You don't have to catch the ball, sweetie. I think, you already said it so beautifully, that it's just exactly whatever. I mean, if a child said that to you, Mommy, if I don't catch the ball, something bad's going to happen, you would say, nothing bad's going to happen, honey. You don't have to catch the ball.
Oh, I want to be conscious of time and the fact that we had listeners reach out because we shared that we were going to have you on the show and that we were going to talk about our own brands of not enough. And we had quite a few women talk to us about their fear of not being a good enough mother, which Aimee and I have talked about. We completely share. And even just my eyes are even more open about the ways in which I projected that fear onto my daughter. I can see, there are some places where I feel like I want her to come talk to us right now too. And so if you could speak to that fear of not being good enough as a mother. And then we also had another one that I think a lot of us can relate to, is not knowing enough, not being smart enough.
Oh, well, sure. As a mother, I definitely can identify with that thought, not a good mother, not a good enough mother. And there's a lot. Again, this could be an entire podcast in itself, because that is a loaded one. That, again, understanding the origins, like, where did we get this idea that a mother should be all these things? Notice that we mostly have these things around mothers and not fathers. It was helpful for me to learn that, I'm pretty sure it was Freud, and he did contribute in positive ways for sure to our profession, but he also was I believe the one who sort of coined some of these phrases around, the overprotective mother, the this mother, the that mother, like putting these labels onto mothers. So basically, if a child comes in with some sort of problem, the doctor immediately looks at the mother to see what sort of mothering, is happening there. Thus, this insidious belief creeps into our culture that then it must be mother's fault. It's always mother. We do need to look to the overculture. We need to look to these systems that we're in to understand where we get these ideas, and then we start to do that to other mothers and to our own mothers. And though I think acknowledging wounding from our caregivers is important, as I know that my own children have to acknowledge the wounding that I have done to them. I mean, that's part of being in relationships and healing. But this belief that we carry that there is such thing as this perfect mother, it's detrimental, and I've certainly wasted countless amounts of energy feeling bad about my mothering, being sorry about my mothering, beating myself up for my mothering. I feel I have a lot of empathy when I hear people speaking about themselves in this way. And I do think we can still connect this, if I sit with myself, where did I get, yes, okay, so society or, systems maybe has put this out there. And also, I carry these younger parts of myself. And like you guys, I have my own stories of times where I felt rejected because of the way I looked or the way my voice sounded or my lack of something. Even in our mothering, there are opportunities to pause and say, gosh, how old do I feel right now? I don't feel like whatever age I am. I feel like I'm 6 years old right now. What happened when I was 6? What happened when I was 16? Are there exiled parts of me that just kind of come out as I'm a bad mother or I'm not enough, when actually there's a little being in there, a little part in there that just so needs my love and attention.
The not smart enough, the not knowing enough. Like, I think we all see this in our positions as entrepreneurs and people who work with other people when it comes to healing. It's like we always feel like we have to take more trainings, that we have to know more and do more before we feel like we're worthy of doing our work in the world. What do you say to the woman who feels that she doesn't know enough or she's not smart enough?
I go back to this idea of where did we get this notion that it's all about our intellect, it's all about how much we know. As women, we have so many beautiful instincts and intuitions and life experiences, and so much to draw on. But again, kind of growing up in this overculture that made everything about our intellect, and your test scores and your GPA and the letters behind your name. Again, we're coming back to this system that really negates the thousands of years where, this would be pre-patriarchy, where women, had it used to be that women were the plant medicine, the people that carried the medicine and all the knowledge of this. And, that this has gotten lost in the history of the world. And I know the podcast isn't about that, but I think I've been thinking about this a lot, how affected we still are, even in our fourth wave of feminism. We're still carrying these insidious beliefs that just need to be challenged so that we can all come back to, celebrating ourselves as the wise, amazing beings that we are.
Jodi, this has been powerful. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate you walking us through this. Do you have any places of your own where you don't feel that you're enough?
For sure. This has also been my lifelong journey. And I think the last time I was with you guys, I shared some of my story around being adopted and just going through some of my life experiences. And certainly came into adulthood with a diminished sense of self. And so, yes, I do, I relate to that. And more recently at a retreat, I had quite a powerful spiritual experience, I guess you could say, encounter with myself, where I was really, it was like connecting with this older, wiser part of myself that in a very kind way saying to me, you really need to stop being so silly with all this thinking. It was kind and playful, but it was also very poignant. Like, however many years you have left on this earth, lady, don't spend another minute with these sorts of thoughts that you're not enough or that you did this wrong, or it was just so clear to me in that moment that I need to be kind of done with that, to really get on with this work that I feel called to do, these people that I feel called to love. If you look up the word good in the dictionary, one of it actually, the root, it's interesting, the root is a Gothic word, which is God. And so it's sort of funny if you think of it that way. I'm not God enough. Well, that's because I'm not God. And so maybe I could just stop having that expectation depending on what your belief system is, I kind of think that also I do have a part of God in me. And that's sort of combination of my humanness and some kind of divine spark is absolutely enough to be here on this planet and to share what I came here to share. I'm 52, so I'm not speaking so much as a younger woman anymore. My kids are out of the home. I mean, I had this experience sort of post where you guys are still in some of those trenches. So I hope that, I want your listeners keep that perspective that, if you were talking to me 10 years ago, I would have been saying something different, but that this is kind of where I've landed these days. I'm ready to sort of get on with it now.
And I want to highlight that sentence that you just said, get on with it. You and I recently had a conversation, and it just occurred to me that I wanted everybody to hear two phrases that you said that I have carried with me, which we so often do in wonderful conversations with our girlfriends. You said, first of all, that you were ready to just blow away specific limiting stories that you had carried, that you were just going to blow that thought away. And I have really taken that with me over the last couple of weeks since we had that conversation. And also you did share with me, it's just time to get on with it. And I like that. Yeah, I think it's important to go back and know where our triggers are and connect with those younger parts of us and do the healing, but also to not be overly attached to those stories and carry them into our present, and to remember that all possibilities are there for us, that we can get on with it.
Yeah. And yes, I certainly don't want to come across here as glossing over anything. The older I get, I think the more I realize this is simpler than we think, though it can, be painful, and it does take effort on our part to go and work with these younger parts, because I always come back to love, that there is a simplicity to it. It really is about loving those parts of ourselves and bringing them home. But sometimes when something sounds easy or it sounds simple, we don't trust it, because we also kind of grew up in these systems that tell us, no, it's going to be hard and arduous, and you're going to be pounding away at this for your whole life. And though I think it's a life journey, I'm also more persuaded these days that we do our work, and then we blow it away and we get on with it.
We hope that you'll come back several times a year to share your insights and wisdom with us. And in the meantime, would you please share with our listeners how they can know more about you and work with you and your beautiful events?
Thank you. Well, I'll happily come back whenever you invite me. I love hanging out with you guys. And you can find me on my website, which is jodikrahn.com, JODIKRAHN. And there you'll find my way to contact me. And I do one-on-one sessions, both online and in person in the Okanagan. And then I do have offerings that I call Gather Her, usually a couple of times a year. And you can just, look on my website or sign up for my newsletter to find out when those events will be. Oh, I guess I should say I'm on Instagram too, at Gather Her, gather.her, and be happy to see anybody there.
Thank you so much, Jodi. This was an amazing conversation, and I still feel like my heart's beating out of my chest, but thank you for walking us through this. This was very healing.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Radiant Warrior podcast. If you found it valuable, please leave us a positive review to help others find it.
And please check out the Radiant Warrior podcast on Instagram and Facebook to leave us your questions and find out where you can come and practice with us next.